So the questions that you should be listening to as we're reading are: define the following. What is a share? What is a dividend? What does buying on margin mean? What are the benefits of buying on margin, and what are the risks of buying on margin? List the events or issues that in the U.S. economy that signaled financial danger. The crash started in what year? Effect on the average stock price was. Why didn't the market bounce back? The Great Depression. Causes other than the crash. List them. List 2 major effects of the Great Depression and list 3 ways people coped. So here we go. Playing the stock market. Many Americans in the 1920s thought that they had discovered a shortcut to Easy Street. They borrowed money and played the stock market. Some who did this got rich, but the risks proved to be greater than most people imagined. The stock market, especially the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, had long been the place where corporations went to raise money. On the exchange, shares of a company's stock are sold to investors through brokers. Each share represents a portion of the ownership in a company. In the 1920s, stock prices seemed to be going up and up. Investors thought that they would always make a profit when buying stock. In theory, stock prices go up or down according to the prospects of the company issuing the stock. If the company's chances of earning a profit are good, its stock sells for a high price. Many stock buyers are investing in the company's future. They hope to earn a regular dividend or a share of the company's profits. Others hope to make a profit by selling their stock at a higher price than they paid for it. In the 1920s, a great many people played the stock market for the same reasons that gamblers play roulette. They weren't looking for dividends. They were gambling that the price of the stock would keep going up. They would reap their reward when they sold the stock for a far higher price than they had paid for it. And stock prices did keep going up, as long as many people were scrambling to buy stocks, bidding their prices higher and higher. Was there no limit to how high stock prices could go? Apparently not. People may pay $60 a share on Monday and sell for $65, $70, or $100 a share on Friday. It seemed so easy. At the time, it was possible to buy stock by making only a small down payment. In 1927 or 1928, the down payment was as little as 10%. In 1929, the amount of down payment increased to 45 or 50%. The rest of the purchase price could be borrowed, that is, the stock could be bought on margin. And many people were buying stock this way. They hoped they could sell the stock for a much higher price than they had paid for it. Then they could pay off their margin debt, whatever they had borrowed, and still make a profit. In our story, 2 friends are talking about the stock market. Richie wants to invest, but Steve has other uses for his money. Why does Steve disagree with Richie? New York City, March 1st, 1928. What do you mean you're quitting school? Asked Steve. You can't be serious. Richie laughed. If you had half a brain, you'd quit too. But in 2 years, you'll be finished with college. That's 2 years of my life that I can't afford to waste. There are lots of people making big money these days. I'm going to get my share. Steve looked puzzled. Please, Mr. Rockefeller, would you mind telling me how you're going to make your fortune? I've lined up a job in a bank. I'm going to put all my earnings in the stock market. You've come up with some dumb ideas, Richie, but this has got to be the worst. Richie became angry. Grow up, Steve. Take your nose out of the books you're always reading and look at what's going on. The stock market is booming and people are making millions of dollars. That's fool's gold, Richie. The experts say that most stocks aren't worth anywhere near what they're selling for. One day the buying will stop and the selling will begin. Then the whole market will collapse. You'll lose everything. Come off it, Steve. The stock market has been going strong for a long time. Sure, stock prices are high. Maybe stocks are selling for more than they're worth. So what? As long as people keep buying, the market will keep going up. As for prices falling, they already have. Stock prices have fallen 2 or 3 times this year, and each time the market has come back even stronger. No, sir, this stock market is not about to collapse. You're taking an awful chance, Richie. You can't get something for nothing. Believe me, the best way to prepare for the future is to go to college. I'm sure that the more college training I have, the more money I can earn. That's old-fashioned thinking, Steve. Go ahead, stay in college. Look me up in a couple of years from now when you graduate. Maybe I'll lend you some money, or I might even have a job for you. You could be my chauffeur. As stock market prices climbed to new highs, some investors made millions almost overnight. Their stories inspired others to put their life savings and anything they could borrow into the booming market. But certain danger signs were appearing in the American economy. Farm prices were falling, and many farmers could no longer pay their bills or keep their farms. Industries were producing more goods than people could buy, so quantities of goods began to stack up in warehouses. As factories cut back on production, thousands were thrown out of work or had their wages cut. The companies that own these factories were the same ones people invested in when they bought shares on the stock market. Actually, the real value of stocks was shrinking even though the stocks were selling for higher and higher prices. Some market watchers warned that the investment market was like a time bomb. No one knew when the bomb would explode. Few seemed to worry, though, as long as they were making money. Richie and Steve went their separate ways. Richie got a job in a bank. He invested most of his money in stocks. Steve continued his college education. September 3rd, 1929. Richie called Steve on the telephone. How's it going, Steve? Learning much from those books of yours? More every day, replied Steve. I haven't heard from you in ages. Made your first million yet? Richie chuckled. Not quite a million, but I'm doing all right. I've been promoted again, and I put my money on a real winner, Radio Corporation of America. I just checked with my stockbroker, and it's $505 a share. When I bought the stock, it was at $300, and all I had to put was $150 a share. I borrowed the rest. Say, how about having lunch with me? My treat, of course. They met at a fancy restaurant. Steve tried to appear as though he had such lunches every day, but he'd never been in such a swanky place before. He hardly knew what fork to use, let alone what glass. Boy, Richie, Steve said, you sure know how to live in style. Oh, this is nothing, said Richie. Wait till I'm really rich. By the way, don't forget that chauffeur's job I mentioned. I don't have a limousine yet, but when I get one, the chauffeur's job is yours, if you're ready to give up those musty books. Thanks a lot, but no thanks, said Steve. During the autumn of 1929, stock market prices slipped and then slipped some more. By late October, the Great Wall Street crash had begun. Between September and November 1929, the price of average stock fell by half, and the bottom hadn't been reached yet. Stock prices kept falling for the next 2.5 years. People like Richie, who had bought stock on margin, found they now owed more money than the stock was worth. They sold their stock before it could fall even lower, but there were now more sellers than buyers, and stock prices continued to fall. The Great Depression. The Wall Street crash of 1929 was like the straw that broke the camel's back. A new type of panic gripped Americans. Businesses which had already been slowing down came to a virtual standstill. More workers were laid off. People had less and less money to spend, which meant there were fewer buyers for the goods in American warehouses. Without buyers, there was little need for factories to keep on producing goods, so factories closed and more people lost their jobs. Without these jobs, there were still less money to spend and fewer buyers, and the cycle went. Business and political leaders insisted that the economy was basically sound. They said the main need was to restore confidence. Political leaders such as President Herbert Hoover and Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon issued a stream of optimistic statements. The worst is behind us, they said, and said again. But still, businesses did not pick up. In 1931, more than 8 million people were out of work. This was about 16% of the civilian labor force. By 1933, almost 13 million were unemployed. 1 in 4 had no job. Many of the unemployed drifted from place to place seeking a job, any job, but there were few jobs of any kind. The United States was in the worst business slump it had ever known. The slump was called the Great Depression. The Wall Street crash was only one of many causes of the Depression. One cause lay outside the United States. There was a financial crisis in Europe and a decline in world trade. This hurt U.S. banks and U.S. businesses that sold to other countries. Other causes grew out of serious hidden deficits in the U.S. economy itself. There were too few buyers for the many goods U.S. industries turned out. This resulted from low wages, low farm prices, and a tax system that gave special advantages to rich people. It also resulted from the large investments that companies had been making in new factories to turn out more and more goods. Banks came under severe strain as business activity dwindled. Many banks were unable to collect on loans. When depositors heard that a bank was in trouble, they rushed to withdraw their savings. This just added to the bank's difficulties. Thousands of banks collapsed or went out of business, and many depositors lost all their savings. The Great Depression was a turning point in American life. It shook people's confidence in themselves and in the future. Thousands of homeless people slept in subways, public parks, and abandoned factories and warehouses. Many even welcomed going to jail so they could get a free meal and a night's sleep on a bed. Hungry families walked, hitchhiked, or caught rides on trains in search of food, shelter, and work. Men who had been business executives sold newspapers, shined shoes, or sold apples. Some people even started forest fires and then hired themselves as firefighters. Many stood in what were called breadlines to get free food. The places giving out meals were also called soup kitchens. A few begged money for food. People learned to live with hunger and fear of the future. All wondered why this land of plenty had suddenly become a land that offered nothing. In our story, Jerry and Alma, this does not apply, recently married teenagers joined the rootless wanderers searching for food, shelter, and work. What does the Great Depression mean to them? What does it mean to America?